So about a year ago now, Clipping dropped the album There Existed an Addiction to Blood, which was massively critically acclaimed. Their cult following that they've always had from the start has only really grown stronger and stronger and stronger, and a lot of people that love what they do are pretty much in agreement that they push the envelope, push the boundaries with each and every album that they do. They really started the huge, extravagant, conceptual type stuff from Splendor and Misery, really. Before that, they were always experimental and quite strange, but they hadn't really gone as gargantuan with the concept like they did with that one. There Existed an Addiction to Blood kind of took it one step further again by focusing on death, and here we are this year with Visions of Bodies Being Burned kind of being the companion piece, this sequel, if you will, to that album, because once again, the tropes, these stories are really focusing on very similar things. The theme is still very much intact. We're still getting tracks focusing on death. We're still getting really vivid, detailed tracks that are incredibly disturbing and disgusting. For whatever reason though, I seem to like this one quite a bit more than their last one, even though you could look at both and think that they are incredibly similar in what they're trying to achieve and what they're trying to do. Conceptually, they're very much in the same ballpark, in the same wavelength, but I don't really know what it is with this one. It just seems to be working a lot better. I think the tracks are more musically appealing to me overall. There aren't any choruses that I find to be pretty weak. David, although is still keeping very similar flows and rapping in very similar ways to what he's always done, it's just interesting me a little bit more with how he's rapping and the instrumentals that he's choosing and Clipping or creating here, because the last album just kind of underwhelmed me in a lot of ways. I think lyrically, the themes of each track are much more interesting in the way that they're portraying them. Again, there wasn't necessarily anything wrong with what they did last time around, but I think the horrorcore element was shoved in your face a bit too much. A lot of it just seemed to kind of wear off me with more listens, whereas this album kind of kept getting better with each listen as I unpacked the lyrics more and more. The track Say the Name is quite interesting. It's very much prototypical horrorcore, which is funny because I was just saying that was kind of shoved in your face a bit too much last time around. But I think the theme of the song is just a bit tighter, and the general lyrics that David's throwing out there are really interesting too. It's very much about the character, the Candyman. It's retelling the story from a slightly different lens, I guess. So many lyrics alluding to and referencing many different horror films throughout history. There's the Psycho reference in there. Lots of other ones too. When you read through, you'll probably catch them if you recognize the film that David is referring to. It's just a really interesting way to kind of kick off the album. Obviously there's the intro track, but this is really the track that sets the tone, I think. Really twisted and pitched down chorus really works effectively, and then that outro as well, once David has stopped rapping and the chorus is finished, like, god damn, the twisted nature of the instrumental just really hits you hard. And what I think this album does really well on quite a few tracks, which I'll talk about, is twisting the narrative of certain horror tropes or certain things and kind of like flipping them upside down and telling you the story from a slightly different perspective. And it just gives it this really interesting theme, which you don't usually tend to get from many artists out there. But I do feel like David has always been such a talented writer that he can make stuff like this work. Who out there would make a song like 96 Neve Campbell, which actually reminds me a lot of the track Work from the Clipping self-titled album from 2014. The instrumental and the way that the female rappers come through just totally reminds me of that vibe, and the way he's rapping on the chorus as well. But the theme of the song is essentially twisting the very obvious trope that's been thrown into our faces throughout the history of horror films. The final girl shtick, which I think we've seen time and time again across many horror classics, the idea that everyone's been killed off, but the one girl ends up being the survivor at the end. But this time around, Clipping have twisted it so that the final girl is not just running around screaming with blood all over her face, just absolutely petrified, screaming the neighborhoods down, trying to find anywhere to escape, just in the same way that you would see at the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Instead, what you get is that, in fact, the final girl is a complete badass, and instead of just being this, you know, this scared little girl type character, she's taking it into her own hands and being the badass and killing the killer. The most telling line on the album is when David says, "Call out her name, wrong step," alluding to the idea that the killer calling out the name of the girl made the mistake by doing that, because he's the one that should be scared and he's the one that should be hiding and not making himself you know, very clear to the girl so that she could then kick his ass. Verses from Cam and China are absolute badass as well, essentially depicting what they're gonna do to try and survive. It's a really clever song, and just shows that the writing is really creative from Clipping's perspective to make a song like this and make it work really well. Of course, it's catchy as hell too with the "this bitch bass." It's so good, it's so good. The track "She Bad" is once again twisting things a little bit, talking about how the, you know, narrative from films like Blair Witch Project, where, you know, a group of teenagers are just so obsessed with finding this ghost or this kind of a mythical thing, this sort of like folklore type story, kind of go into the woods, go into the forest and put themselves in danger. The chorus is kind of twisting it around a little bit with the whole "she bad" type thing, sort of making it out that, you know, it's so tempting to see what this ghost is going to be. You know, she's so bad, ooh, it's so mysterious, but you shouldn't really put yourself in danger because she's gonna kill you. Line that David says as well, where maybe someone's gonna find the videotape, obviously meaning that they're gonna die and someone's gonna find the story through that. Something's Underneath is really excellent from a musical standpoint, because the instrumental here is so chaotic, and David once again throwing out his flows in such like a gun shop type way, where it's just like pa 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 pa, and you just cannot keep up with anything he says. He's been doing this for years, but there are certain moments on each album that he, you know, he breaks out into this, and there's always one track where it's like most impressive in comparison to every other track, and this is that one. The speed he raps at is insane. The narrative here is sort of once again twisting things upside down. Something's underneath being the zombies are coming up from underground to take over the world, but instead of it being the usual type of zombie story, it's instead they're trying to kind of, I guess, get revenge on the humans for ruining Earth and, you know, causing the climate to slowly start falling apart as we know it. David says, "Call it reborning," as if the Earth is healing again, I guess. Look, I like this one on a musical level, but I can't help but be irked a little bit by the sentiment of what the lyrics are focusing on here, because it sort of reminds me of, you know, when we all went into lockdown and, you know, the pandemic was, you know, on the rise at the start, and people like sharing things about how the Earth is healing and, you know, we're the disease, we're the ones killing the Earth, we're the ones killing everything. It just all came across as a bit pretentious, and it was like, right, but, you know, this is actually causing people to die because, you know, the pandemic is literally killing people sooner than they were supposed to have died. People losing jobs, people's mental health is deteriorating. Like, it's not really what we need to talk about right now. And this kind of track just reminds you of that a little bit, just this idea that all humans deserve to be punished because we're killing the Earth. It's not really that simple. But we do get some excellent tracks later on in the album anyway, with tracks like Pain Every Day. Pain Every Day, the way this instrumental just exists, how? I tend to love hardcore breaks, breakcore, anything of that manner. I've reviewed quite a few albums on this channel of that style and been very positive, so to hear David rap over this, wow. The story he's telling, again, twisting the narrative of this time, the people that have been lynched, people that have been hung. I'm assuming he's talking about, you know, black people in history in the 50s, 60s, throughout history really, particularly in America, that, you know, have been hung by the KKK, or maybe not even the KKK, it could just be anything else. And this time around, you know, the ghosts of those people come back and get revenge on the people that killed them. Like, it's a really interesting way to tell a story, and of course with the lyrics being so vividly detailed and the gruesomeness of it all coming through, Yeah, the writing here is absolutely phenomenal. The track sounds fantastic. Like, sure, there are themes similar on this album to the last album, of course, they're companion pieces. But when I think of There Existed an Addiction to Blood, I just don't remember any tracks sounding as good as this, like sounding this good. David rapping over this, because it's so crazy. The track Check the Lock is a great one as well. The depiction of anxiety and paranoia is insane. It's like watching Jesse in Breaking Bad in that scene where he's like looking out the window and he thinks that someone's constantly out to get him, and there's just like, you know, a mailman coming to the door and that's all it is, things like that. I just realized how American I sounded then by saying mailman. Over here we say postman. Postman's better. David once again depicting this story really well, where he says, you know, tell his brother he's ready for the eulogy, that even the clock ticking is sending this guy crazy. It just really tells this story incredibly well. Checking the lock at every turn, thinking something's in the room, something looks slightly different. What could it be? Is it just me going crazy or someone in the house? Tracks like this build up the atmosphere incredibly well, as does Looking Like Me, which features the experimental hip-hop, industrial hip-hop group Horror, who have been at it for quite some time now. But I guess it's cool to see them pair up with Clipping, because both worlds colliding just creates an insane mess. Like, the instrumental here is ridiculous. It just smashes you in the face. It assaults you. It just assaults you. Body for the Pile is this album's The Show, which depicts again another story that's really twisted and gruesome, but David tells it in a way that's almost satirical and really creepy. Like, he has this tone to his voice, especially on the chorus where he says like 3 little pigs. There's just like this really, really messed up nature to the track, but I like the sort of tongue-in-cheekness of it all. And I feel like David should do more songs like this where he's telling it from the perspective of a guy that's like, you know, kind of like excited about it. Like, it's a really weird, twisted, satirical type thing, but it really works in the way that he's telling it. I guess the actual track though doesn't really have that much of a detailed narrative like some of the other ones. Like, I've been going through the lyrics so much in this review, and there's so much to unpack with each track, but this one's essentially just 3 cops either getting killed or dying. There isn't really much of a reason to it, unless it's just once again, you know, David throwing in another song about death, which obviously can happen to anyone at any point. But, you know, I don't know if it necessarily matches many of the other tracks in terms of how the story is told. And Lacing is this hazy cloud rap mega mash, honestly. Like, it sounds like something Clams Casino would have done in like 2011. The sample that's being used on the chorus, David singing over it, is really, really special. Honestly, it's a really special track for Clipping. They haven't done anything like this before. So I guess, like, in terms of, I guess, critiques, I don't particularly enjoy Eaten Alive. I have already mentioned a few of the lyrical themes on this album too, but you know, that don't necessarily work or don't necessarily have that same punch that some of the other ones do. Eaten Alive just musically isn't particularly very interesting. The jazzy instrumental is so slow paced. David on this one is pretty stiff and dull. I guess while I'm on that, a lot of the times the lyrics kind of overshadow David sometimes. Like, he sort of raps very similarly on every track, so you don't necessarily get much variation. You get variation in the instrumentals, obviously, but I think there's a point of the album where I just personally start to get a bit bored of his voice, which is kind of what's holding me back from like going back to this album over and over again. It's not that he's rapping the same every track, but there's something about his flow that's quite repetitive, and it hasn't really changed that much since the early days of Clipping either. So I think just all of these albums coming one after the other, you kind of start to notice similar flows with what he does, but they're still pushing boundaries with what they're doing instrumentally, which I think will always be super impressive. And just overall, this album just seems to hit me a bit harder than the last one, for all the reasons I've given in this review. Even Secret Peace, which is this nice little ambient piece at the end, doesn't last 20 minutes just like Piano Burning did. I mean, be honest with yourself. Have you listened to that from start to finish since the album came out? I mean, you might have, but like, be honest. Have you? 20 minutes of a piano crackling and burning? Have you? But anyway, that's just a little tangent I was going on there. Overall, I think this is a good album. I do like this quite a lot. So many lyrical themes that really entertain me. It's like watching a horror film play out a lot of the times. And David should probably get writing a horror film at some point, because he he certainly has enough ideas to make a fantastic screenplay. So I think a 7 out of 10 from me is what I'm going to go with. Do really like this album. The minor critiques that I brought up there, just kind of drop it down a little bit. But overall, it is still really good. And I think a lot of people are going to love this one as well. Thank you for watching this review. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Hopefully you enjoyed what I had to say here. Sorry it's gone on quite long. It's a lengthy review this time. But hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you have a good day. Subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, goodbye. Goodbye.